Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Let's do forensics on my week 4 picks. I was 2-1, off to a great start. No guarantee of future performance, but just know I've had a winning record the first 4 weeks of the season. The videos are up on YouTube. Last week, the picks that worked were the Giants +6 against the Buffalo Bills. Giants won the game outright. The Redskins +3 over the Philadelphia Eagles. That was nerve-wracking, but the Redskins actually ended up winning that game outright. The game I lost were the Arizona Cardinals laying 6.5 to the St. Louis Rams. Let me say, I was a bit surprised by a few things. The first is that the Redskin defense is even better than I envisioned. Right? I encourage people to look hard at that Redskin team. Kirk Cousins is going to throw interceptions from time to time. There's no question about that. But Cousins is a pocket passer. He's a huge step up over RG3. If Cousins gets hurt, right, if the team, for whatever reason, bypasses Colt McCoy and goes back to RG3, I think the Redskins are going to be in a tailspin, right? I am a bit mystified by how the Eagles couldn't figure out to stick Pierre Garçon on that last touchdown. Because, quite frankly, the Redskin receiving corps is awfully thin, right? Garçon is really the biggest piece of the Redskin receiving corps. But understand, the Redskins right now are combining defense with a rushing attack, right? With one vertical threat in Pierre Garçon. I think they were undervalued. Another team that's undervalued are the New York Giants. Right? I think the idea that the Bills could beat the Giants was a little bit crazy to me. Right? The Giants have an excellent receiving corps. I understand Victor Cruz is banged up. But understand that their tight end's in the mix. Ruben Randall is in the mix to go with Odell Beckham Jr. Right? Odell Beckham didn't do much this last week, and still the Giants were able to win the game. Understand, most quarterbacks don't have one Super Bowl victory. Eli Manning has 2. Understand, he was dominant in the fourth quarter of both games, right? Especially his second Super Bowl victory, where he completely ramped it up in the fourth quarter. Now, they had a new offense that bothered the team. The team was unfamiliar with it last year. This year, Eli Manning's able to get rid of the ball quickly. Let's revisit that Giant loss to the Atlanta Falcons. We now know that the Falcons might be a juggernaut. Now, the Giants are in a division with the Redskins, who quite frankly don't have the Giants' talent. Right? With the Eagles, who still haven't figured out how to run the football. Right, with Sam Bradford throwing picks. And the Cowboys, who, let's face it, are defensively challenged and have a quarterback who can't throw to the left side of the field. Right? Understand the talent missing from the Cowboys right now. Their starting quarterback, Tony Romo. Their Pro Bowl wide receiver, Dez Bryant. Now you're telling me that Lance Dunbar is gone for the season? Now you're telling me that Sean Lee had to leave the game because of injury? Folks, you need to watch the Cowboys closely. Last year, they did it on the back of DeMarco Murray. Right? They had a time of possession they're not coming close to matching this year. Right? The Cowboys, they're injured. Their backup quarterback really wasn't able to exploit a very weak New Orleans Saints defense, right? The Saints go into the game 0-3, right? I think the Cowboys are going to have problems going forward. Let me say this about the Cardinals. I think you need to discount this game because the Rams do well against divisional opponents. At least they have this year, right? They've beaten Seattle. They've beaten the Cardinals. Right? Jeff Fisher knows how to put together a package to deal with teams that he's familiar with. Right? I think a better test for the Cardinals is going to be when they play someone outside of the division. I'll agree with those who point out correctly that Arizona really hasn't had a very strong strength of schedule. Certainly, the San Francisco 49ers, who they beat the week before this last week, at this point really are barely a pro team. Right? One wonders how the Niners would fare against a team like, let's say, Alabama in college. Right? So I'll agree there is a little bit of inflation in Arizona's record. No question about that. Their schedule is going to get harder than it's been. Now, just a few more random comments about the state of football. Why did Joe Philbin of the Dolphins get fired? I'll tell you why. Because late in that game, on a possession where the Dolphins needed to score, Ryan Tannehill, of all the receivers he had a chance of throwing the ball to, decided to pretend he was Colin Kaepernick. You remember when Kaepernick, with the conference on the line, decided in his infinite wisdom to try to throw on Richard Sherman, one of the league's best corners? Well, somehow against the Jets, Ryan Tannehill, in his infinite wisdom, decided to throw on Darrelle Revis. And let me tell you, if you look at the play, and I understand the Dolphin receiver trips over Revis's feet, but if you look at the play, there is no time on that play, none whatsoever, where it looks like the receiver has beaten Darrelle Revis. Right? That's an incredibly poor read by a young quarterback. I believe these owners understand that it's easier to get rid of the coach than it is the multi-million-dollar quarterback. I'm just telling you, Ryan Tannehill has shown incredibly poor judgment throughout this year. But that play really framed just how bad his judgment was. I encourage you to look at that play. Right? In my opinion, Philbin didn't do that bad a job. He just has a quarterback who right now is still learning the position. Let's shift gears. You know what? They aren't going to say this in the mainstream media, but there's a full-blown crisis with the San Francisco 49ers. Right now, Colin Kaepernick is a great athlete. Unfortunately for him, more is required of the quarterback position in the National Football League. Right? This guy has a gun. He can throw it deep. He can run like a deer. This last week, he couldn't even hit wide open receivers. Folks, this guy's confidence right now is in tatters. Right? You remember Steve Blass, the pitcher in baseball, who suddenly went from being a stud to being unable to throw strikes. You might remember Rick Ankiel. You have a similar problem right now in San Francisco. I'm surprised the press is hushed about it. Kaepernick has been a train wreck. Understand his contract is really illusory. Right? It's a series of one-year deals. A team can pull the plug with not that much exposure at any time. Right? It's really only guaranteed for injury, not for playing ability. Right? The 49ers scored 3 points last weekend in a game that they played at home. Right? Think about that. Now, they have a backup, Blaine Gabbert. He was on the team last year. He's one of the highest paid backup quarterbacks in the league. Somebody in Niner management likes this kid. Right? I'm just telling you that right now in San Francisco, you should not assume that Colin Kaepernick is going to be the starting quarterback at the end of the year. By the way, the Niners have to travel back east this week to play the New York Giants. Let me say this. I took some time watching the Denver-Minnesota game. I know Denver won the game, right? Folks, they didn't score 25 points at home. Let me say this. Peyton Manning looked atrocious. He threw so many ducks it felt like a hunting trip. Understand, Denver's not fully utilizing their personnel. Emmanuel Sanders looks like a guy on the side of a milk carton. Right? Peyton Manning can't even really throw jump balls for Demaryius Thomas. Right? The team really isn't clicking. You get the feeling it's structural. That Peyton Manning is never going to get back the arm strength. I'm really wondering whether John Elway, a strong-armed former quarterback, is going to risk having Peyton Manning continue to quarterback this team into the playoffs. Because I'm telling you, Manning's throws, he can make the reads, but he's so below average physically that I really wonder whether he'll be able to succeed late in the playoffs when you're playing against better teams. Right? How did he look last year at home against Indy in the playoffs? Let's talk about the Indianapolis Colts. Now look, whether he's had a sore shoulder or not, Andrew Luck in big games throws too many interceptions. All you have to do is look at what Bill Belichick has done to him in the playoffs. Right? Luck's a guy who is a gunslinger. He throws in crucial parts of the game, very dangerous balls. It worked out against Tennessee. Right? Makes a big throw into at least double coverage late in that game. Well, Andrew Luck, of course, has a bad shoulder. He misses this game. Without Andrew Luck, that Colt offense, and in the offseason we were hearing about Andre Johnson joining T.Y. Hilton. Right? We were hearing about how Philip Dorsett was going to be a big addition. Right? The Colts were supposed to be bolstering their team. After all, they made it to the AFC Championship last year, and they wanted to take that extra step. Here they were against Jacksonville. They were struggling. The MVP of the Colts, quite frankly, was the kicker, Adam Vinatieri. Right? Looking at the game, I didn't get the feeling that Frank Gore was getting a lot of yardage. That there was any receiver who looked dominant on the team. Right? They didn't look appreciably better at home than the Jacksonville Jaguars. Let me say this about the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they're an improved team to me. But a few weeks ago, I was watching a game. It was Tom Brady and the New England Patriots against the Jacksonville Jaguars in New England. Now, the interesting thing with quarterbacks who can read defenses is that it looks like they're spending the entire game throwing to open receivers. Right? Take Drew Brees. Right? Not just the overtime drive against the Dallas Cowboys yesterday, but the last drive in regulation. that he had, right? Well, Tom Brady's kind of like Joe Montana, right? There is a little moment in Brady's career where Randy Moss joins the team, and Tom Brady then starts throwing to Moss in coverage. But most of the time, Tom Brady's, favorite receiver by his own admission is the open receiver. So against Jacksonville, it looked like guys were always open because that's the way it always appears when you're dealing with a quarterback who can read defenses and who can eliminate covered receivers. Right? So think about it. Think about the Montana Rice years. Did you ever see Jerry Rice dive for a football? Probably not. Right? Montana's hitting Rice when Rice is open. The team's doing imaginative things. Look at the Patriots. The secret, in my opinion, of Rob Gronkowski isn't just the guy's size and athleticism. And Gronk's hard to bring down. But it's the fact that when you watch Gronkowski for his party boy public persona, right? The same kind of public persona that didn't work for Johnny Manziel. But yet Gronk is, we all say, hey, good for Gronk. Well, anyway, forget the party persona. This guy has a very high IQ, doesn't he? Because the Patriots place him all over the line of scrimmage. He's on this side. He's on that side. He's over here. He's out by the wide receiver. The guy's running every route in the book. Keep in mind, he's not a wide receiver, right? He's a tight end. And the guy, whatever side of the field he's on, does it flawlessly. Right? The defense can't keep up with him. Brady seems to hit him. Gronk looks open 9 times out of 10, even in the red zone. These Gronkowski touchdowns, most of the time, isn't he wide open in the end zone? Now, I contrast that with Blake Bortles, the Jacksonville quarterback. I'm telling you, as I was watching the game, it looked to me like Blake Bortles repeatedly was throwing into double coverage. He had a gun, no question about it. He's accurate with the football, no question about it. But he's routinely throwing into double coverage. Now, I'm a layman, but that tells me that Blake Bortles can't play defense, can't read defenses. If you're a Jacksonville Jaguar fan, you need to be concerned about the fact that Bortles couldn't even get his team to 15 points against the Indianapolis Colts defense, which statistically is not one of the highly ranked defenses in the league. Let me say this about Atlanta. Now, here online, I recommend it, and I stand by this, that you have to have some futures money on the Atlanta Falcons. Right? They're off to an explosive start. Right? And they play a cream puff schedule. Right? The rest of the year, folks, their strength of schedule is just not that difficult. Right? What I'd like to know, though, is how Atlanta's going to fare against someone other than Ryan Mallett. Wow, did he look bad. I got to tell you, on one of my fantasy teams, I actually have Mallett on that team as a secondary quarterback. I'm impressed by Mallett's arm strength. I was impressed by Mallett in college. But wow, didn't the Texans look a lot better with Brian Hoyer in? Right? After they gave up on Mallett in that game against Atlanta. The Texans play Thursday night. They don't have enough time to shift quarterbacks. They've announced Mallett is going to be the starter. This is going to be a big game for the Houston Texan future. Mallett has to do better. Has to do better than he did this last week. Keep in mind how stunning it was. Arian Foster, multiple Pro Bowler, was in the backfield. Mallett actually had an elite running back to take some of the pressure off the passing game. He also had DeAndre Hopkins, the wide receiver, having a great game. Hopkins, by the way, would end the game with more than 150 receiving yards. And still, Ryan Mallett was awful. You need to consider that if you're even considering betting on the Houston Texans. Let me say this too. Jameis Winston has a gun. There's no question about it. But don't get too carried away by Carolina winning that game. Because Jameis Winston threw 4 interceptions. If you look at the interceptions too, he's throwing it right to defensive players. Right? Jameis seems to be having a harder transition to the pros. The number 2 pick, Marcus Mariota. Right? Let me say, when you get 4 picks against a quarterback, you should win the game. I'll say this, Carolina's off to a great start. Wow. Until I feel comfortable with the Carolina Panther receiving core, I'm still going to pick the Atlanta Falcons over them to win the division. Right? Not all unbeaten records are created equally. Right? I know with Atlanta, Julio Jones is having a record year. Hankerson did a lot of damage last week. Right? I know Matt Ryan has multiple weapons. Multiple above average weapons to deal with at wide receiver. Right? Do I know that about the Carolina Panthers and Cam Newton? I also, too, am a bit of a skeptic. When I see an offense rely on a quarterback and his running ability, as much as Carolina's offense relies on Cam Newton. Let me say this, too. It's a Monday night. Monday night. You're playing at home before fans who really have given you one of the league's best home field advantages, right? Because not all home field advantages are created equally. I'll tell you what, I thought Russell Wilson was running for his life in this Monday night football game against the Lions. Running for his life. Right? Seattle's defense looked good. But don't lose sight of the shortcomings of Seattle's offense at this point in the season. Right? I thought the offense struggled mightily. Right? I thought the offensive line, I'm not sure if they figured out how to block Ziggy Ansah. Right? He seemed to be tossing guys left and right. This didn't feel like the same Seahawk offense that we've seen the last 2 years. Right? Now, we're hearing now that Marshawn Lynch's hamstring injury might be more than we expected. Well, understand the team is 2-2 right now. Right? They're going to have to hold it down until they get back to where they were. I saw Russell Wilson doing a lot of running. I didn't see the team doing a lot of scoring. Right? Let me say, in a fantasy pool, I do have Thomas Rawls, who is the third string guy, right, behind Marshawn and Fred Jackson. Well, Fred Jackson got injured. Right? When you think about betting on the Seattle Seahawks, were you really thinking about betting on Thomas Rawls at the beginning of the year? Right? So just a few thoughts. Let's just say, too, you heard John Gruden on the Monday Night Telecast say Cam Chancellor's tackle of Calvin Johnson literally right before the goal line. Chancellor knocking the ball loose so it went out the back of the end zone was a season-saving play. That tells you that Gruden watched the entire game and didn't have confidence in Seattle's offense's ability to score again if Calvin Johnson had broken the plane with the ball on that last play. Right? So Seattle is still a work in progress. Just understand their division is hellacious. Right? Arizona already in the past has beaten Seattle in Seattle. Right? Bruce Arians is one of the league's best coaches. The Rams have beaten Seattle this year. Right? Fortunately for Seattle, they have 2 games against the 49ers. They're going to win both of those games, right? Let's just say the Vegas line on the Niners, in terms of wins and losses, opened at 8.5, right? I'm sure a lot of bettors are now laughing at how easy it was to cash on the under 8.5. It actually dropped 2 games to 6.5, right? I'm just telling you, even the 6.5 is a bit generous when the team only scored 3 points at home against Green Bay. Green Bay has a lot of things going for it. A great defense is not one of them, right? This team was so eager to run one of football's best coaches, Jim Harbaugh. You're seeing what Jim Harbaugh is doing right now at Michigan, right? Jim Harbaugh himself was a former NFL quarterback, so he could literally talk to Colin Kaepernick, quarterback to quarterback. Right? He knew Colin Kaepernick. He was there when Colin Kaepernick was picked. He participated in the selection of Colin Kaepernick. Who's like that now on the 49ers? Is Tom Sula, the defensive new head coach, going to be able to talk to Colin Kaepernick about the intricacies of playing quarterback? Do you feel Kaepernick's game has progressed since last season? Keep in mind, in the offseason, he was supposed to have spent time with Kurt Warner, a guy who famously got Arizona to the Super Bowl in a year in which he had 3 different 1,000-yard receivers on the team. Right? Anquan Bolden, Steve Breston, and Larry Fitzgerald. Right? Kurt Warner was a guy who spread the ball around. Keep in mind, with the Rams, he had Ike Bruce, Torrey Holt, Oz Hakeem, and Marshall Faulk, right, catching balls out of the backfield. And he kept everyone happy. Do you see any shades of that in Colin Kaepernick's game? My own gut tells me Kaepernick sooner or later is going to have to be replaced. Let me close by saying, how do you make the NFL without the ability to throw to your left side on a regular basis? The ball distribution for Brandon Weeden, the Cowboy starting quarterback, is awful. Right? It's awful. You need to consider that whenever the Cowboys play a team with a defensive-minded coach or with a great secondary. Right? In my opinion, Jason Witten is a future Hall of Famer. The problem, though, is if I put a Cam Chancellor on a Jason Witten, and if I have someone to stick Terrence Williams, right? Is Weeden comfortable enough in throwing the ball around the field to actually look to his left side to complete passes? I think that's an open question. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I understand some of my views are not mainstream. I'll post picks here for Week 5 of the NFL shortly. Right? Just know that in Week 4, I was 2-1. I won with the Giants +6 over the Bills. I won with the Redskins +3 over Philly. I lost with the Arizona Cardinals laying 6.5 over the Rams. Good luck. I hope you cash all your tickets. Thanks for stopping by.